Pessimist's Guide to Productivity, Chapter 1. Embracing Schopenhauer's Realism. The 19th century philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer famously declared that in everyday life, daily life is suffering. In other words, our desires, ambitions. He believed the universe is driven by a blind, restless force. In Schopenhauer's view, reason and rational planning are just the surface underneath it all. Life is one long struggle. At first, this may sound like a prescription for despair, but what if this pessimistic diagnosis is actually a practical diagnosis? If life is suffering because our desires are endless, then perhaps true productivity lies in accepting that fact and adjusting our goals accordingly. Consider life not as a linear climb toward endless success. Schopenhauer observed that when we have what we want, we soon swing into boredom, a dull dissatisfaction. When we want something we don't have, we feel pain or frustration. He saw human existence as an oscillation between these poles. This insight that getting what we want only buys a short break before boredom kicks in is key. If we chase too many goals, we keep ourselves in constant agitation. But if we accept that neither extreme is truly satisfying, we might find a calmer middle path. Chapter 2. The blind will and endless striving. Schopenhauer's central idea is that a blind, irrational will to live animates everything. Imagine the world as a raw energy, perpetually pushing forward without reason within each of us. Hunger, desire, ambition, even the urge to prove ourselves, but these impulses never rest. As Schopenhauer puts it, we want more than we can ever have, so our very nature ensures dissatisfaction. Every achievement quickly yields a new desire. The accomplished writer still craves the next bestseller. The promoted employee still chases another title in a scene. One could picture a marathon runner who, having finished one race, immediately ties their shoes for the next. The finish line is only a new starting block. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy notes that in daily life, as long as our consciousness remains at the ordinary level, it will never resolve itself into a condition of greater tranquility. Schopenhauer explicitly states that everyday life is suffering. Strive for wealth, and you worry about losing it. Seek approval, and you dread failure. Desire itself becomes a source of frustration, even our quests for meaning or knowledge. Chapter 3. Desire, pain, and productivity. If our goals and ambitions inherently generate stress, what then is the productive path? The paradox is that doing more can mean achieving less. Schopenhauer would argue that to work effectively, we must first work on our mindset, reduce unnecessary wants, so we can focus on what truly matters. In practical terms, this might mean cutting back on side projects, saying no to extra meetings, remove some impulses, and the mind settles. Modern science confirms that removing distraction boosts productivity. Psychologists observe that our brains are not designed for heavy-duty multitasking. We're wired to be monotaskers, handling one focus at a time. Constantly juggling tasks actually reduces productivity. One study suggests by as much as 40%. Stanford researchers likewise found that people who frequently use many media channels at once perform significantly worse on memory tasks. Chasing multiple goals simultaneously fractures our attention and leaves us with less actual work done. A Schopenhauerian might say each time we spread our will across 10 tasks, each one suffers a bit of neglect. Chapter 4. The Boredom Paradox. Schopenhauer's key insight on the bright side is that if desire causes pain, then removing desire leads to boredom, and boredom itself is the flip side of suffering. In his words, life swings between pain and boredom. Whenever one source of suffering and unmet desire is calmed, another arises. Lack of stimulation. Strive for success, and the next unmet goal naggingly appears. Step off the treadmill, and suddenly the quiet is unnerving. Schopenhauer even noted that the wealthiest people, the kings and plutocrats with every comfort, are often the greatest victims of boredom. With no urgent needs left, they face the yawning emptiness. Is this all? Crucially, this boredom isn't purely negative. Modern research, in fact, shows brief boredom can spur creativity and problem solving. A 2013 study found that even a small dose of boredom primes our brains. In an Atlassian article summarizing the science, a psychologist explains that when the mind lies fallow, it has space to wander and incubate ideas. Historical creators J.K. Rowling conceived Harry Potter during a long, screen-free train ride, and many artists report inspiration striking in idleness, in Schopenhauer's terms, letting the wheel rest by removing stimuli. For productivity, the lesson is this downtime has value. If we schedule our calendars so tightly that there's never an idle moment, a short break, a walk without your phone, or even a shower, can reset perspective. Paradoxically, doing less can unlock fresh energy and innovation. This reflects Schopenhauer's thought that equanimity comes not from endless achievement, but from occasional renunciation and mental rest. Limits, asceticism, and intentionality. Schopenhauer's ultimate prescription was ascetic, voluntarily denying many of life's comforts and desires. By minimizing wants, he argued, one reduces suffering. He praised figures like monks or even the poorest soul who, with poverty and chastity, breaks the cycle of craving in modern terms. It's the idea of limiting choices to focus your will when you buy fewer gadgets. When you commit to a small set of meaningful goals, your daily structure simplifies. Imagine two creators, one who chases every new trend and startup idea, and another who picks one craft and honors it. The first is pulled in 10 directions. The second is disciplined, rejecting a dozen tempting projects to deepen the work on one. Schopenhauer would say the latter is wise by renouncing those extra desires. In practice, this might look like intentional neglect, unsubscribing from newsletters, deleting social apps, batching emails. Each small restraint is a brick in a calmer foundation. This echoes Schopenhauer's comment that by minimizing desires, the suffering caused by life's frustration can be reduced. We can call these strategies intentional limits for productivity. Set strict boundaries, maybe work in fixed deep work sessions. Keep your to-do list short if it has 50 items. Any new opportunity gets the question, do I really need this? If the answer is no, it's not just a relief, it's a surrendering of unnecessary willpower. Over time, we begin to find that our goals become calmer and more realistic rather than fighting against life's current. We swim with a focus that Schopenhauer would call a kind of tranquility in productivity. Chapter 6. The Modern Hustle Trap. Today's world could be a case study in Schopenhauer's diagnoses. We live in a society that venerates hustle culture. The constant grinding, extra hours, side projects, and 24/7 availability. Workers pressured to do more are burning out. A recent review found burned out employees were around 32% less productive and lost nearly 60% of their ability to focus. In other words, pushing beyond healthy limits backfires. Contrast this with an intentionally paced approach. Imagine a content writer who blocks 2 solid hours to write one article with phone off and email silent, versus a harried writer answering Slack messages while drafting, editing, tweeting, and buying coffee. Fully immersed, calm, unafraid of the silence. The second is like a battlefield general juggling crises, always in violent conflict with distractions. To use Schopenhauer's term, the frantic approach might feel productive, but studies show it's inefficient. In fact, multitasking is literally costing our brains when we switch tasks. So the hustle mindset, always grinding, is similar to Schopenhauer's image of the tortured will. It fights non-stop and pays with exhaustion. A more Schopenhauerian path is acknowledging our limits instead of padding schedules to the brim. Leave space. Work intensively, yes, but then rest or do something completely different. Take lunch away from the desk. Walk, meditate, read fiction. Do something that doesn't feed the will. These are practical ascetic hacks, voluntary pauses. By letting go of the ambition to do more all the time, we paradoxically sustain our energy for when it truly matters. Chapter 7. Monotasking and mindful focus. One concrete application of this philosophy is single task focus. Schopenhauer teaches us to turn toward one thing at a time. This is the opposite of the modern scattershot. Psychologists confirm what the philosopher intuited: our brains excel when we give them one task. As noted, our minds are wired to be monotaskers when you whip out your phone mid-task or juggle 2 documents. Even brief interruptions steal hundreds of cognitive resources. Imagine 2 scenarios in one. A researcher settles on one problem, perhaps modeling a data set, and works steadily until solved. In another, he splits attention, replying to emails, skimming news, and drafting a blog simultaneously. The first by Schopenhauer's logic, is like a clear stream of will flowing steadily. The second is a turbulent river repeatedly diverted. The stream will make consistent progress. The river will lose momentum in swirling eddies of distraction. In real life, we find the same. Deep, focused sessions yield breakthroughs, whereas fragmented time often yields only busy work. To practice this, when starting a project, shut all other tabs and apps. Give yourself a quiet, uncluttered environment. If your mind wanders, gently bring it back. This is akin to Schopenhauer's aesthetic states, like losing oneself in a painting. You become absorbed and will less. An observer of the task in productivity term, an energized, optimal state of mind. And since your attention isn't split, the work is done better and often faster than if you tried to do two things at once. Chapter 8. Practical hacks from pessimism. What does all this philosophy look like in daily life? Below are concrete strategies. Productivity hacks inspired by Schopenhauer's insights. Each is about doing less intentionally. By applying them, we transform pessimism into power. Prioritize deep goals. Choose a small number of meaningful projects and ignore the rest. Schopenhauer would say, drop trivial desires so your attention narrows to the truly important. Make a not-to-do list of busy work you'll refuse. For example, if your goal is to write a book, decline speaking gigs or extra freelance writing that distract from that focus. It ensures your effort isn't diluted. Monotask relentlessly. Commit to one task at a time, turn off notification, close extra tabs, and give yourself chunks of uninterrupted time. Remember, psychologists find our brains are not designed for heavy-duty multitasking. When you must multitask, schedule swift breaks to clear your mind practically. Work with your phone in another room. Use website blockers. Like squeezing life out of an object rather than scattering life across many objects. Embrace boredom. Deliberately leave short pockets of time unscheduled instead of filling every gap. Allow your mind to idle. You might sit and stare out a window for 5 minutes, or just do household chores. In other words, letting the will rest invites fresh ideas next time you're stuck on a problem. Take a brief break rather than reaching for new stimuli. Let the quiet do its work. Limit stimulation. In line with ascetic minimalism, reduce modern distractions. Keep your workspace clean. Disable push notifications on your devices. Use the simplest tools that work: a plain notepad, a clear calendar. The calmer your environment, the calmer your mind. Schopenhauer noted that tranquility comes. For example, schedule an email-free afternoon once a week, or set daily times for social media. Each voluntary restriction is a small victory of will over distraction. Set intentional deadlines. Work against the clock to avoid drifting. When you have a clear, non-negotiable timeline, the will has a clear channel. In fact, give yourself too much time and boredom sets in. A fixed deadline trains you to concentrate. There's no time for random diversion. It's like Schopenhauer's ascetic self-imposition. You tell yourself, for this hour, reflect on progress, not results. Lastly, periodically step back to assess your system of work, not just outcome. Schopenhauer suggests introspection reveals the hidden tricks of the will. Ask yourself, am I doing this because it's meaningful, or just out of habit or fear of missing out? Keep a simple journal of your work pattern. Often, noticing that a task gave you more anxiety than satisfaction is enough to let it go. By intentionally reflecting, even gloomily, in a diary, you can prune the unnecessary drives. These tactics, when implemented, they tend to synergize as you cut distractions and limit goals. You become like the minimalist artist in a quiet studio, intense, rather than a hyperactive ant blinded by its own bustle. Chapter 9. From pessimist to productive. In Schopenhauer's eyes, our world may be angry and desperate, but that revelation doesn't have to crush us. Instead, it can sharpen our tools. Productivity isn't about denying reality or chaining ourselves to endless tasks. It's about working with reality, understanding that the mind's well-being is just as important as its output. By accepting that the will's striving can never be satisfied, we free ourselves from chasing the impossible. We can settle into projects with gratitude and focus. In the end, the pessimist's edge is realism. Recognize that desire spawns frustration. Use that quiet, sharpened skills. Breathe. Note the path ahead. Productivity, in this view, becomes not a reckless sprint, but a steady course. Fewer goals, but deeper effort. Fewer distractions and fuller attention. That is the pessimist's guide to productivity, an unexpected blueprint for doing less, being more intentional, and letting the wisdom of suffering actually guide us to a more tranquil, effective life.